Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. We're really excited for this webinar. We do it each year, but this year we're very excited to have Janice kind of do all the meat, I guess, of this webinar. And Janice, of course, is the program director at BayPath. It is okay if you are planning to apply to BayPath. She's not giving like BayPath specific information. This is for everybody, okay? So it's totally fine if you are planning to apply there. The information she's giving, again, is general. I'm going to take over again at the end to talk more about like GC Prep specific coaching options. And I will be available to answer any questions that are sent through the chat while we are headed in here. Okay. So with that, I'll turn it over to Janice and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you. So just 2 seconds about me. Before I was the program director at BayPath, I was a clinical genetic counselor for a very, very long time. But it's a really different role to be a program director. And now that I am, I see things differently. And I've done a lot of interviewing, and I have a lot of opinions on what's a good interview, what's maybe not as good an interview, how things can go a little bit more smoothly. So I hope it'll be helpful that I'm sharing this tonight. If you have any questions, hopefully we'll have time at the end to answer them, but you're always more than welcome to email me as well. So the first thing I wanted to mention is that if you haven't heard yet whether you're being offered an interview anywhere, please don't worry. Many of the programs likely haven't sent out their invitations yet, or they may be doing it on kind of a rolling basis. We haven't sent out our interview invitations yet. We're still very busily reviewing the applications. So I would say most of them probably go out in early to mid-February, and the interviews take place between late February and late March, roughly. Every program's a little bit different. So, okay, why isn't this slide advancing? There we go. So we have a busy agenda tonight. First, I thought I would demystify the interview process a little bit in terms of what programs are looking for, as well as what you should be looking for during the interview process. Then I'll give you some pointers on how to prepare for the interview and some examples of some of the common questions you're likely to be asked and things that you can think about in answering them. And then, like I said, hopefully we'll have time for questions. Several of us at GC Prep also provide one-on-one interview prep sessions, if that will help you. And I know that Michaela is going to go over all of that at the end. So schools are looking for students who innately have some of the traits that you can't teach, that are fundamentally appropriate for being a genetic counselor. Obviously, your program is going to provide you with the genetics and the counseling education you need, as well as the clinical practice, and they can help you develop the skills you will need. But many of the traits are inborn, or they're ingrained in a person since childhood. Things like, obviously, a passion for genetics. They want to make sure you aren't planning to bail after a few years and head to medical school or a PhD research program or something. We desperately need more genetic counselors, not just people who consider genetic counseling on their way to a different career. It's actually quite surprising to me every year how many applicants we have who have accrued degree after degree. And we wonder if we're just another program providing them an opportunity, in essence, to avoid going out to the real world for a while, or if perhaps they really just don't know what they want. So because there are a pretty limited number of slots for genetic counseling students, we want to make sure we reserve them for people who fervently wish to be genetic counselors for their careers, not just as a stepping stone to something else. So if they ask you, and they likely will, why you want to be a genetic counselor, make sure your answer is more nuanced than simply, you just want to help people, which we're going to talk about more later. Second, obviously, we care a lot about academics. Grad school is difficult, and the board exam is difficult, and the field takes work and commitment to continuing education. As I mentioned, each seat in a program is a precious resource for the profession. So program directors have to be pretty certain an applicant is going to be able to pass and succeed. we all know that for a ton of reasons, sorry, I got lost on here. A person's GPA may not at all reflect their actual intelligence or their ability to do well in grad school. If your GPA is lower than you'd like or lower than the school recommends, make sure you're ready to address a question about why you think you'll be successful and make sure you have evidence. So what I mean by that is, let's say you say that you found your passion in genetic counseling. That's not very convincing if you don't have genetics and higher level biology courses with good grades and some examples of advocacy, research, or other activities that show your commitment to genetic counseling. Remember, too, that academic excellence means nothing as a genetic counselor if you don't have traits like empathy. So, for example, most programs are looking to see if you have a real understanding that people will have fears and wants and needs that you yourself have not experienced. Your crisis and other advocacy work is an important part of your application because that's most likely where you've had those specific experiences that you can share, where you assisted someone through a trial, or perhaps you failed but learned. It's not enough for you to talk about wanting to help people. You need to have specific examples ready that display your empathic reaction in the moment. They want to know that you didn't freeze up, for example, when someone needed emotional support from you. So when you prep for this kind of question, try to think of at least 2 experiences from your advocacy work or from shadowing you've done or your own life experiences when a situation demanding empathy arose. It's not really important what the actual experience was or whether you succeeded. They care about how you processed what someone else was feeling, how you reacted, and what you learned. They also care that you're teachable. Some of you, probably most of you, are extremely qualified and have excellent grades, which is awesome. And having confidence about all of that is great. But arrogant answers or overconfidence is not going to sit well with interviewers. These people are going to be your teachers, and they need to know that you're teachable. They need to know that when they send you out to fieldwork rotations, that you're going to take constructive criticism well, that you're going to apply the lessons you've learned through failure to be better. This is why it's not bad to share examples of when you did fail, either in your crisis work or anywhere else. You know, it's embarrassing and it felt bad at the time, but if you've learned from it and you did differently next time, or you know what you would do if that came up again, that shows the program that when you mess up in a genetic counseling session or anywhere else, and you will, that you will be humble enough to take the correction given to you and be better next time. They may ask you to discuss a time when you had no idea what to do and describe how you handled it. How did you learn from it, and what realizations did you have? Being brave doesn't mean you have to be extroverted or outgoing, but it does mean that you have to have enough of a backbone to stand up in situations where injustice is happening, especially when the well-being of your patient is involved. So schools tend to ask about this in the form of questioning about how did you handle a conflict? Have you successfully diffused a tense situation? Did you keep your cool when being pressured? Did you speak up when someone was being treated unfairly? The example you use doesn't have to be in any way related to genetic counseling. It needs to be an experience that you learned from. So if you want to talk about an issue that you had with a roommate, you can do that. You know, maybe you were an RA in a dorm in college and or you were a TA in a course and you had a student asking you to change a grade. Or like I said, as an RA, you know, you had a student in the dorm who was asking you to mediate an argument with a roommate or something like that. You can talk about stories like that. There's nothing wrong with that. And there are situations that in life are uncomfortable or they're scary, but they require us to be willing to step up and be proactive on our own or someone else's behalf. So the program is looking to know that you have some experience doing uncomfortable things and that you're willing and able to take them on. So if you're preparing for a question like this in your interview, you may want to think about a couple of experiences where you handled a conflict or you did something uncomfortable, you stood up for someone, all the things I've been talking about. How did it turn out? What did you learn about yourself? How can you apply it to a situation you might encounter in a genetic counseling session? I say this to applicants all the time, whenever possible, as long as it's not too contrived, try to bring your story back to something having to do with genetic counseling. I'm hoping we'll have time to practice that a little bit later, but for example, if they ask you how you've handled a situation where there were people in conflict, You could tell the story I mentioned about roommates you were helping to reconcile, but then explain how you could see where this kind of discussion might be helpful if maybe you had a couple in your office who were arguing about whether to terminate a pregnancy they just found out had an abnormality. The skills you honed as an RA could be actually helpful in a situation like that. So if you can do it without it being too forced, try to bring every answer you have to every one of their questions back to something that you might be able to use in genetic counseling. And then you want to show them your insight in the situation too. Like, what is your analysis of the experience? Not just what happened, but how did you react to what happened? And add your analysis of your own thoughts and feelings, perhaps what you know about others' thoughts and feelings about what happened, and how your behavior changed or how you were motivated because of it. I know that was a lot. I'm having trouble advancing slides for some reason. Oops, did I go too far? Yeah, okay. So for those of you who don't know that much about the matching process, you can only rank schools that interviewed you for the match. So I'm happy to discuss this with any of you offline later if you're not clear on how the match process works. Wow, I can't talk tonight. But if, say, you applied to 10 programs and 6 of them offer you an interview, you're only able to rank those 6. You may not choose to rank all of them. And this is probably a topic for another day, but real quick, I'll just say, don't rank a program that you couldn't really see yourself going to, because it is a binding process. And you do your ranking and we as programs do our ranking, and then this very complicated computer algorithm figures out how to match you with your highest choice of school that also ranked you pretty highly. And from what I understand, tie goes to the applicant. So they try to make sure that applicants have their highest choice possible. I'm digressing a little bit, but I know it's a really complicated thing. But remember that while you're trying to impress the interviewers, you're also trying to find out as much as you can from them about the program, the faculty, the students, the fieldwork opportunities, and the research project that you're going to be required to do. Each school has a different vibe or style to it. Some may be more research focused, some may be more psychosocially oriented, some may feel more inviting to you than others. So when you go to do your ranking after all of this, make sure that you are most highly ranking the school that feels like the best fit for you. Make sure you like the faculty, that the students seem happy and well adjusted, and that you could see yourself on that campus. If the answer to any of those questions is no, you'd be better off not ranking that school. As hard as it is to think about not getting into a program, you're kind of better off applying another year than being in a program that really doesn't make you happy. To the extent you're able, pay attention to your gut. Okay. Genetic counselors and people who want to be genetic counselors tend to be super into logic and list making, but all the pro and con lists in the world are not going to help you without considering your gut experiences during the interviews. So it may surprise you to know that we as program leaders and interviewers are doing the same thing. So yes, we have rubrics and we're looking for certain things, but I vividly remember one applicant where she was sitting. I remember the color of the paint on the walls behind her during her virtual interview. Something about her and our discussion made me think, I want her. I knew it. And she wasn't our best student, as it turns out, but she was good and she learned well, and she has gone out and represented our school really well. She does us proud. Sometimes you just know. Other applicants have rubbed us the wrong way from the start, even though they might have been bright and accomplished. They were bright and accomplished enough that we wanted to interview them to begin with. And then we met with them and we thought, just doesn't feel like the right fit for our program. Doesn't mean that person wouldn't have been a wonderful fit for another program. So the connections we're making are important. You want to be your best, but you want to be yourself. The program needs to know who they're bringing into their program if they're ranking you highly. It's okay to have some discomfort in all of this. You're going to be nervous. That's okay. But hopefully once you get settled in for the interview, it'll start to dissipate a little bit, and you can tell a great interview when you really start vibing with the person interviewing you. Genetic counselors, generally speaking, are very friendly people, so you can expect a welcoming and kind person, at least in most cases. Regardless of how the interview is actually going, they're going to be nice to you, but pay attention to the undercurrents of the contact. You know, we all know what it's like to really hit it off with somebody, and we know what it's like when we don't. Ideally, you want to hit it off with the person, of course, because it means you're going to be remembered. It means you're going to like that person who, you know, hopefully in some way, at least tangentially related to the program that you may have some relationships with later on. If your interview time is up and you feel disappointed that the conversation is over for now, that's a good sign. Alternatively, if you feel unsettled, you know, beyond what's just your nerves, like the interviewers are throwing out weird questions that almost feel like microaggressions, or they're unengaged, or you're feeling off balance, or anything doesn't feel right to you, that could be a sign that it's not going well, and or that it's not a good fit for a program for you. Underrepresented applicants especially need to have their radar up, because you're trying to suss out the environment you'll be in for the next 2 years. Grad school is hard enough without having any form of hostile environment to manage as well. And I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that I expect that any of these programs are going to be hostile to you. Please don't misunderstand. But sometimes things happen. And I probably don't need to tell you to keep your radar up, but just something to kind of keep in mind, because these people are going to be your instructors, your mentors, your supervisors. So, you know, if something feels off to you, it might be. You're asking yourself, can you learn from them? Do you feel comfortable learning from them? Hopefully you'll have a chance to meet with current students. Are they happy? By the way, if meetings with students are offered to you during the interview or sometime around the interview time, if they're optional, do them. Obviously, if they're mandatory, you're going to do them. But if they're optional, do them, because nothing is going to give you a better idea of what it's like to be a student there than meeting with the actual students. So I remember when I was a student and we interviewed or helped to interview students for the following cohort. So we were responsible for taking them out for lunch. And one of the people that I went out to lunch with, I went back to my program director after and said, we need her. She is absolutely fantastic. And not only did she do well in the program, but she has done really well in the profession. She is a program director herself. She's still a friend to this day. So I just thought I would pass that along to you. Switching gears. Here are some general recommendations for you in thinking about how to prepare. First, do some research on the people who are going to interview you. Likely they're going to email you an agenda for the day, and you can then, see what you can find on LinkedIn, on the program's website, whatever social media you might want to use, Google Scholar, NSGC website, the ACGC website, ABGC, they're all out there. The more you know about the people and the program, the more you can ask specific questions about their work or their involvement in other organizations like NSGC, and show off that you're diligent and engaged in the genetic counseling community. You can't go wrong if you do that. Go back to the slide earlier that I said about some of the typical genetic counselor qualities. Pull out experiences from your life that highlight each of those qualities. You definitely want to have 2 or 3 of them on board about your crisis experience. And remember not just to spout off about what you know about their program, but really be show your emotional processes and how you have grown. The programs want to see you in your typical state, meaning not terribly nervous, if you can manage to do that, so that they can get to know you, because your personality is going to end up being your counseling style. It's going to matter how you interact with patients, how you interact with peers and supervisors, and so forth. So as best you can, take steps to tackle your nerves so that you can react and engage authentically. Maybe you'd benefit from meditation. Maybe it would help to practice interview questions with a friend, a family member, a favorite professor, talk to yourself in the mirror, whoever might help you polish your responses and relax you. You can videotape yourself and then watch it later and see, are you using a lot of filler words? Are you fidgeting a lot? Things that you don't even know that you're doing. This also, of course, in addition to relaxing you, will give you confidence. We at GC Prep have educational videos with even more details about prepping for interviews and what to look for. And I'm imagining that Michaela will mention that again later. You're likely going to have an aha moment in the interview where you think, I've got this. Like, I prepared for this type of question. So perhaps my best advice is think before you speak. It is okay to pause and say, that's a good question. Let me think about that. It's also okay to say, I hadn't thought about that. Is it okay if we circle back to that question a little bit later? I really want to be able to answer your question effectively. What's great about that kind of answer is that, one, it shows you're human. And two, it shows that you care deeply about the answer you're supplying. You're not just trying to get through it. You're not shooting from the hip. You're caring about what you say to them, which are super important things to do when you're meeting with patients, and they're going to like to see your process. Oops, did I go too far again? All right, so let's go through some of the common interview questions and some basic do's and don'ts with each. Probably the most asked questions are, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to be a genetic counselor? And tell me about a time you had some kind of conflict or you were in an ethically tricky situation, and what did you do about it? Having practiced answers can help you feel confident starting your interview, as long as you don't make it so practiced that it feels like you're just hitting play on a recording. Okay. The tell me about yourself question, which is a deceptively challenging question because you really don't know what they're looking for. Think about what you most want them to know about you. If they leave your interview with one idea about you, what do you want that to be? Try to point out specific traits and goals, things that are important to you as an applicant. So, for example, you could say something like, I think the thing I'm most known for among my family and friends is my ability to connect with others, even if we haven't known each other for very long. I have a passion for hearing people's stories, and growing up, I always knew I wanted to do something where I could intervene at a stressful point for them. So when I found genetic counseling, it all clicked. When doing my crisis work, I really enjoyed being a support when a client's world was crumbling. That felt rewarding to me, even though it was hard. I'm not sure exactly where in genetic counseling I'll end up, but I know I want to be in a clinic to develop rapport with patients and advocate for their best care. So you tell them about yourself, tell them what you want to do. Don't get so lost in things that you've done before. So if they say, tell me about yourself, and you say, well, so I've been a genetic counseling assistant for the last 4 years, and I've helped a lot of patients, and I've this and I've that. You're telling them what you do. You're not telling them who you are. So think a little bit more. You can start with that, but remember that that's on your resume. They already know that about you. So it doesn't mean you can't mention it. You can, but go deeper than that. And don't be afraid at the end to say, and, in my spare time, I like to knit. I like to garden. I like to go for hikes. I'm really outdoorsy. I love to cook. I find it really relaxing. There's nothing wrong with that. They want to know who you are as a person. They're not just saying, tell me why you'd be a good genetic counselor. They may ask you that as a separate question. But if they say, tell me about yourself, don't just focus on your genetic counseling preparation or experience. So there's an example here that includes some, whoops, sorry. I can't see the whole screen when I'm scrolling through, so I apologize. There we go. So this thing is in my way. I don't know how to move that toolbar, but anyway, so what's in red over here are qualities, and what's in yellow are more like
things
skills
that are important.
Yeah, I can't. Anyway, and the green one, they don't look green to me, but there's a couple like down here, this prenatal job. Is there another one? Those are
I
your
think that's
goals.
the one. Yeah, it's the
Yeah,
gold.
was it just the one? Okay. It doesn't look green on my screen for some reason.
I
Anyway,
turned it a darker green. Sorry about that.
anyway, so this is one example, and you can fill in your things. I think, in fact, on the next screen is a basic script. Yep. And this will be, when you have the recording, you'll have this. You can fill these things in. You obviously are not going to use the example on the previous screen exactly, but you'll put in your qualities, your skills, and what you want to do that can give you at least a basic script on what you want to say. But make the style your own, right? You want it to sound like you because you want your enthusiasm to come through. But this can at least kind of help you round out the details, because it's really hard when somebody says, tell me about yourself. It feels like it should be so easy. It isn't. Okay. The why do you want to be a genetic counseling question. So when I first started interviewing applicants, I asked that question. Why do you want to be a genetic counselor? I swear if I heard one more time that I love genetics, but I really love to be with people, I got to get out from behind the lab bench, I was going to scream. So for year 2, I changed the question to, a lot of times when we ask people why they want to be a genetic counselor, that's what they say. So other than that, why do you want to be a genetic counselor? And I still heard that same answer over and over. It's not that it's a bad answer. It's just that it's literally everyone's answer. So you need more than that. Please provide more detail. If you just wanted to help people, you could be in a local soup kitchen every day or at any number of other places. Why do you want to help people with genetic counseling specifically? What about the profession speaks to you? You can see some examples on this slide, and many of you have put this kind of information already in your essays. That's okay. It's not a problem to repeat the explanation and even embellish it with more detail if you can. Showing what sets you apart from other applicants is what you're going for here. And again, be authentic. Did you ever watch a beauty pageant? I don't even know if they have those anymore, where a contestant says she wants to cure cancer or create world peace? We all know she's not doing those things, right? I mean, somebody's going to cure cancer eventually. I mean, we have some cures for cancer. That's a whole other tangent. But it so feels inauthentic. Everybody who watches a person say, I'm going to find a world peace, knows you're not going to do that. So think smaller and think about what you could add to the world of genetic counseling. You're not going to see every patient. You're not going to fix every problem, but come up with something more realistic and doable. You're not necessarily committing to ever doing it, but you're giving them an idea of what's important to you. What do you value? What do you bring to their program and to the profession? Okay. Did I skip one? Yes. Tell me about a time when you were in a conflict and what did you do? With this question, they're looking to know, what do you do when you're uncomfortable? You will have many uncomfortable moments as a student, and there are many times when you'll need to put yourself out there in sessions, and there for sure will be times when you fail. That's okay. They're trying to see if you have the maturity to try and keep trying. It's really hard to give a passing grade to a student who's unwilling to attempt counseling because they feel too awkward or uncomfortable, even after being given many chances to practice. So as we discussed before, it's okay if you share a conflict or discomfort story where you failed. What you want to do is show what you learned from that experience and how you grew. Often when sharing a fail kind of story, you'll want to follow it up with the next time you had a chance to do something different and you succeeded, or what you could imagine doing differently that you think would succeed. It's not always necessary to have a follow-up story, but you want to be clear about what you learned and now looking back, what you think you could have done differently to be more successful. And again, bring it back to genetic counseling if you can. So for example, if you had a disagreement with someone you worked with and it got kind of heated and ugly, and halfway through your argument, you realized you had misunderstood something the person said, how did you try to fix it? If you didn't, but you walked away in a huff, maybe you thought about it later and realized you could have handled it differently. You could tell them you're sure at some point throughout the program or your career, you will find yourself in a similar situation. And next time you'll stay in the moment, admit your mistake, apologize, and ask how you might work together to resolve whatever's left of the conflict. It's a simple example, but it can show growth on your part, and it can provide a window into the fact that you're not a pushover, but you are willing to own up to your mistakes and learn from them. Programs love growth. That's going to be part of your job as a student, is to grow. So if you can demonstrate that you've been growing and learning already along the way, they'll know that you're teachable and you're ready to be molded into a good genetic counselor. Oops. I'm having trouble going from one screen to the other. Okay. So this is the what, how, and why question. And there's this formula you can use as you're considering any interview question or even just reflecting on your own experiences. So a basic and rather unimpressive answer to the question of what you did in a case and what you learned from it is to say, just really what happened. Right. So I saw a case with a child with delays, and the mom had a few other pregnancy losses. It was a hard case because of the language barrier and needing an interpreter, but it was still super interesting. There's nothing wrong with that answer. It really tells the interviewer nothing about you or your role in the situation. It doesn't show off your skills at analyzing a situation like a genetic counselor would. And the what of a situation is the least important thing that the interviewers need to know. So you need to include enough details in your story that they understand what you're going to say next, but then you kind of have to have next. So a better way is to say, what you saw in this case, and you can read this on your own. I don't necessarily have to read the whole thing. An answer like this lacks a little depth still, but it at least helps to show that you've identified what tools were used to manage the situation. It's a better answer because it shows that you're absorbing the counseling process and that you noticed a skill set being used, but it's not very reflective of your role or what you experienced when you saw this case. The best way to answer this question is to focus on the why. Why was it interesting? Why do you still think about this session? Why type answers reflect on how you were feeling and thinking in the moment and what you observed others to be feeling and thinking in the moment, to the extent that you're aware of that. How did the parties interact? How did everything make sense? And, in this example where I guess I can read it. I sat in on a session that ended up being really stressful for me. It was a pediatric case, but there was an intense language barrier because the patient spoke a rare dialect that the interpreter wasn't super familiar with. Even though the counselor was calm, I was getting stressed about the communication issue, and I could see the patient was extremely withdrawn. I was actually really worried if she was understanding the information in a meaningful way. I'm not sure exactly what I would have done since I'm not a genetic counselor yet, but I feel like the counselor was a little nonchalant about the whole situation. And that case has stuck with me because I just wonder if that was the best patient care. So when you look at this, you're thinking, well, the applicant was stressed at the language barrier, very reasonable. And there's a super nonchalant genetic counselor with a very withdrawn patient. That feels off. So there's not like some big conclusion here, but the applicant is able to describe why the setting was unsettling to her because of not just her own experience, but the experiences of those around her. So this is the type of insight and analysis that schools are looking for. Okay, so some last thoughts about the interview day itself. Things happen. You might need to postpone your interview, or you may not feel like you're going to represent yourself well if something unforeseen and major happened in your life. It's okay to ask for a postponement or explain to the interviewers that you're not feeling like yourself and why. You are not obligated to provide any real details, and they shouldn't be asking you for any. It should be sufficient to say you had a medical problem, a family emergency, something like that, but only if it's big. Don't use this for something trivial, and don't make excuses. Your interviewers will typically, though not always, be genetic counselors. And as such, they are likely to be empathic, understanding people. You'll be fine with that unless you're taking advantage, and that they won't forget. So, if you start by saying something like, I'm very sorry I was late. That is not my usual way of being. Please forgive. That's enough. You don't have to give strong, not strong, detailed reasons for things, but make sure you don't make excuses and that you own up to it if you need to. Hopefully this isn't going to happen, but if there's a reason that you may not be perfectly up to snuff, you were sick all night and you don't feel well, but you really didn't want to postpone. I think they'll appreciate that as long as you don't use it as an excuse for everything. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I want to give us some time for questions. I know there's some things in the chat. And before we even get to that, Michaela wanted to talk about, let me advance the slide for you, some options in the program.
Some options, yeah, absolutely. And just before we start talking about these like coaching options, I've had a couple questions from applicants already this season that are talking about like the multiple like mini interviewing style, MMI style, which in med school is like multiple like 8-minute interviews, like bam, 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 bam. I haven't really seen like that short in genetic counseling, but it has been like, it's a very common style to have like 4 to 8, like 20 or 30-minute interviews kind of back to back with a couple of breaks. So you're meeting with a lot of different people throughout the day. And so there's no possible way to prepare for every question out there. And I know you guys have probably all been on like the applicants page and you've been sharing lists of like interview questions that have been asked back and forth. And that's fine to the extent, right? If you want to look at those, I'm okay with that. But you can't prepare for every possible question. And so the very best way to prepare for these kind of like small, like MMI style, or even like any type of genetic counseling interview is just to be super familiar with your experiences. Again, what Janice was saying, make sure you can describe what you were thinking in that situation. What was your thought process? What were you feeling? Why was it like, what kind of reaction were you having to the situation? How are you seeing other people react? How are you making your decisions right then? And your familiarity with your various experiences, whether that be in your like crisis work or your personal relationships with people or your work in the past, whatever it might be, having like really thought about those experiences and being really comfortable describing them is going to be your best tool, because then when you get a question that you've never heard before, never read before, haven't prepared for, you can be like, let me like in my head rifle through all the experiences that I have spent a lot of time with. Here's one that makes a lot of sense and is relevant. Let me tell you about it. Okay. So it's less preparing for specific questions and more just being really familiar and insightful about the experiences that you've had. Okay.
And if I can interrupt for half a second, I would add to that, research the program. Make sure you know something, anything about why that program might be a little bit different from others. Don't repeat their website to them. They know their program. Don't tell them what they already know. But if you can talk to them about why their program is so desirable to you, I think that really helps a lot. Even subliminally, they'll be like, oh, she really likes us. This is good.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about this, because again, the best way to take care of nerves is to practice, right? We don't want any deer in headlights moments when you get into your interviews. So the best way to kind of take care of that is practice, practice, practice. And so for the past 2 years since GC Prep has been in business, we've seen about 80% of people who use GC Prep to prepare for their interviews ended up matching. So that 80% is compared to like the national average of people who get interviews. About 51% would match. And so with GC Prep, that goes up to 80. Okay. So Janice, I'll ask you to click there.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so the most basic level, getting more help, this is the least, is like getting your feet wet, right? So we have educational videos, they're pre-recorded. They have a lot of detail about the whole like application process, interview process, what to expect, how to prepare. They're great for people who are like just starting and they're like, I don't know how to like get organized and like start, right? That's really going to be good for people right at the beginning, those educational videos. They can only take you so far though, because they're general information. And at some point you really need to get down into like the depths and the details of your own experiences and pull the insight out of those times that you've had. And so interacting with a coach directly can help you dig through those experiences. Slide or like click, I guess. Thank you. So we do have a mock interview option. So it's an hour long. So basically what that is you submit your CV and your document. Usually I recommend submitting like the longest version of your essay, right? Or if you have a specific interview coming up and that school had kind of a really different requirement for their paper, then you can submit that one. But you submit that to your coach ahead of time. We read it and generate some questions specifically for you out of your documents. And then we get together and we ask you those questions. And you can kind of choose whether you want that to be like, I'll pitch you a question, you answer it, and then we do immediate feedback and just kind of trial that question and work on digging deep. And we do like question, feedback, question, feedback, question, feedback. Or some people just want like, I want this to be like a full trial run. So let's do like 45 minutes of like an interview and then 15 minutes of feedback at the end. We can totally do it like that too. So it's really kind of what you want there. You can do that with one of us GC coaches, but Janice also does them. That's the premium option. Again, you can't do those premium choices if you're applying to BayPath, right? That's a conflict of interest. Okay.
Right.
Okay, next. Sometimes people want like multiple mock interviews, which I recommend because especially if we're doing this like question feedback style, usually by the end of the first mock interview, we haven't covered very many questions, but what we have done is started to learn this pattern of how to really analyze your experiences. And so by the end of like the second or third mock interview, we really see amazing growth. It's like night and day from where they started and where they're ending. And so we've kind of put multiple mock interviews in a package that are discounted compared to buying the same number individually, right? And so if you do one mock interview and you want to roll it into a package, then we'll include it there. Okay. We are doing something a little bit new this year. In the past, people had to pick just one coach to do their session. But this year, if you're doing a mock interview limited series, you could pick multiple coaches. So let's say you wanted to do your first 2 sessions with Coach Jess, and then you wanted your third session to be with me, for example, right? To get different interviewer experiences. Okay. So that's an option. If that type of limited series is something you think you might want to do, then on the website, under like the recurring mentorship tab, there's a orientation that you can book. It's like 15 minutes, but we just talk about what you need and what you're looking for and how to pick coaches. Okay, that's free. Okay. This one, number 4, is brand new this year. It's hot off the press. And this was like the brainchild of all the coaches recently, kind of like came together. Someone pitched an idea, other people modified it. And now we have this really awesome service that we're excited to offer, which was like a realistic interview simulation. So we kind of talked about that MMI style where you have multiple like interviews with different people back to back. So basically this is an hour and a half block where 3 applicants would sign up for this time, and you would all rotate between 3 different interviewers, which is what it's like on interview day. Okay. And it's like there, you know, we show up, the start of it's like, hi, I'm Michaela. I'm going to interview you today. Let's get right into it, right? And it's not so much question, feedback. It's we're going to do 25 minutes of questions. At the end, we might have about 5 minutes to like debrief a little bit before you switch to your next interviewer. But it's really meant to simulate what it's going to be like on the day. After that hour-and-a-half experience is over, the coaches are going to send me a couple of their thoughts about each applicant and where they think they would like put them. Like if the three of us were a school, where do we think we'd put this applicant on our match list? High towards the top, somewhere in the middle, somewhere towards the bottom, right? And then we'll send you that feedback, right? And so you'd have this kind of realistic simulation of what it could be like doing interviews. I don't recommend the interview simulation at the beginning of your interview preparation, right? This is something towards the end, right? You're like, my interview's coming up. I've done everything I can to prepare. Maybe I've done some mock interviews or practice interviewing with other people that I know. But now I need like my trial run. And this is kind of like your last step or like your penultimate step where you can take that feedback and make specific changes before your final day. There are 4 sessions of this simulation with 3 spots each. So there's total like 12 spots for this. 2 sessions are regular, and then 2 sessions are premium and have Janice in it. So very limited seats for that, but we're excited about this opportunity. And if all those sessions get filled and people are still interested, we can kind of put together some more there. Okay. Click. Click. Thanks. We also have like long-term mentorship for interviews. So this is kind of similar to like a limited series mock interviews, but you're working with one coach, and those GC coaches are also certified life coaches. So they have like extra tools and activities to really help you dig down and find like values and strengths and even sometimes your weaknesses to address. And they really have just like a broader spectrum. So people who are really looking for more holistic guidance and coaching and sometimes cheerleading are gonna do well with these like long-term type of interactions. So Coach Jess, who's on tonight, she does that. And one of our other coaches, Jessa, also does that long-term mentorship. So if that's something you're interested in, or if you can't decide between like a limited series and a long-term mentorship, again, there's an orientation session that's free where we meet for half an hour and we just talk about what you need and what would be best for you and what kind of coach is going to be good and pricing and stuff like that. So you can book that on the website. And then last little click there. Another brand new offering is our interview prep boot camp. So we launched our first like application boot camps back in the summer, which went really well. And we're trying this interview prep boot camp for the first time. And this would be for people who are like, I need an all immersive experience. I need just everything, right? And so this is a 6-week course. It's going to be a total of 4 applicants, and they meet twice a week with our coach. It's Coach Jess. Again, she's on tonight. So one night is kind of talking about a specific coaching topic, like presenting yourself or how to answer some of these sticky questions and practicing. And there's a lot of group discussion and collaboration, which our applicants have found really helpful in the past to be able to know that they have an accountability partner and they have other people in the exact same situation and just feel that support with each other. And then the other night each week is actively practicing a mock interview. And so in this setting, each week, one person will be interviewed by the other 3 with the coach moderating. And so the applicants not only get a chance to be interviewed and practice answering questions, but they also get to be in the role of the interviewer. So they get to critically think about, when I read this person's document, like, what am I curious about asking them? Or how did their answer hit? Was that sufficient? What kind of answer would I give? So it's a really interesting perspective to put yourself in the interviewer situation. You also get access to all the educational videos online, and you get a one-on-one mock interview with Coach Jess. And there's just a whole lot going on in that boot camp. So there are 2 sessions of that. One of them is completely full. The 6:45 Eastern time session still has some spots, but it starts on the 31st. So it starts in like a week. And it ends first week of March. Okay. So again, if you're interested in that, there's more details on our website, but there's a lot going on in boot camp. So in general, this list is in this order because it's more or less reflective of like the monetary involvement or like general cost, with like the educational videos being the least and boot camp is the most, right? But we can typically find something that works for everyone so that we make sure we get you the help that you need. We also have one small group coming up that I think Janice is giving. Again, it's a premium one, so if you're going to BayPath, again, we can't do that one for you guys, but it's prepping for interviews. So you get time with, I think it's up to 6 applicants, though I'm going to be honest, we never have 6. So you could be in a room with Janice with like 2 other people talking about how to make your interview better and practicing. That's a good experience. That one's coming up at the beginning of February. Okay. So this is like big picture what we've got going on. If you are overwhelmed or don't know what you need, or you just want help picking, again, going to our website and booking just like an orientation session. It's under like the recurring mentorship tab. Just gets you a free 15 to 30 minutes with me where we talk about what you need and how to best meet your needs and what you're looking for. Okay. You're always welcome to email me, and we can advance to the next slide here, Janice, please. The support at gcprepllc.com goes directly to me. I answer all of those. And we're going to post this webinar. Okay. So I know we are at time, and if you have to bounce, that's totally fine. We got started late, and that is 100% my fault. I apologize to you guys, but we do have some time for questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. They can be for me or Janice or Coach Jess. I will pitch them to the person that you're trying to get them to.
Okay, you want me to stop sharing, I would think?
Yeah, let's go ahead and stop sharing. Yeah. Okay. So there's a question here. If we are interested in doing the limited series mock interviews, when should we book them? Can we wait to receive interviews like in mid-February, or is that too late? Great question. Whenever you want, right? So if you're doing like a limited series, you can't book that directly on the website. You can book an orientation, but then the way that we bill for that limited series is like we invoice you because it depends on how many you want. Do you want 3? Do you want 4? Do you want 6? Like all of those have different discounts. And so if it's something that you're interested in, you can always schedule that orientation with me and we can make a plan, and then you can like pay your invoice when you get the interview invitation. Right? So there's no like requirement or nothing gets like locked down just for doing the like orientation and like this finding out about it stuff session. Okay. Other questions? Oh, I did like, just to bring this to everybody's attention, someone said, what's your opinion on sending a thank you note by email to the people who interviewed you after you're done? I like that. Okay. It's a good idea. So what I would recommend is if you have like a couple minutes between interviews, write down like one thing that you connected with your interviewer about, right? Even if it has nothing to do with genetic counseling. Like you're like, hey, we both love Chipotle and we figured that out in the interview. Totally fine, right? Just write down one thing that you found a connection with, or that you felt like the vibe with your interviewer. And then when you send them your thank you note, you want to keep it short, like a paragraph. Okay, we're not writing an essay here, and they're very busy. So like write them a paragraph thanking them for their time, that one thing to remind them of your connection, right? And go ahead and send that in. Okay. Janice, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I do, sort of, because my mind was going beyond that. So I think it is really a nice thing to do. It's not required. I can say from my perspective, I don't go down the list of people I interviewed and go, check, she answered me, check, she sent me a thank you. You know, we're not doing that, but it is a nice touch and it does help us to remember who you are. What I would expand upon that to say is if you don't match this year, I would recommend reaching out to the people who interviewed you, or even to the program that didn't interview you, to ask, what can I do to improve my application for next year? Every year after the interview invitations go out, and then again after match day, I have a wave of 30 or 40 people email me and say, like, what can I do? And I can't speak for other program directors, but when I do it, I go back through your application. I give you really detailed feedback so that you can hopefully improve your application for next year. Sometimes there's nothing really you can do. Your application's great. It's just that there's so many people who have really good applications, but we will try to give you as much feedback as possible. So anyway, that's a little off topic, but I do think it's important.
Mm-hmm. There's another question here. Oh, and just before we get to that one, I know I've heard from other people in program administration that sometimes, so after they do interviews, then everybody that was involved in the interviews that works in that program, they kind of like all meet and have like a brainstorm and they talk about the applicants that interviewed. And sometimes when they do that, it has happened where someone brought up like, oh, so-and-so sent me like this great thank you note. And so it's not like a guaranteed thing, but if you write a nice one, it could be put on the like stage of, yes, this was like really thoughtful. If it was a meaningful note, okay? There's another question here, Janice, and I think this is going to be a good one for you. It says, like, at the end of the interview, is it a good idea to ask the interviews if they have any hesitancy about accepting you into their program and address any concerns they may have?
Oh, I've not ever had anybody ask me that. That's interesting. I kind of like it, but I don't know that everybody will. You know, you want to say it in terms of, I would like to clear up anything that I may have said that could have been misconstrued, rather than I'm really lacking self-confidence and I just want you to tell me I'm wonderful. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So how you express that, I'm not sure. I kind of like it though. I think it shows that you want to grow from this, you know, or that you want to clear up any misunderstandings.
What if I'm just jumping in here, and would love to know what your thoughts are on this, Janice. If you frame it in a way of asking, you know, like based off of what we've talked about today and what you know about me, are there any areas of weakness perhaps that I could learn to grow in? And it's kind of like you're preempting that question of like asking for feedback before you're like in the moment. I don't know how that would be received and how you would respond if you don't know too much about the applicant, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. And
Okay.
I think that question is totally dependent upon who you ask.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if somebody asked me that question personally, I would think, wow, you know, this is a person who really cares. You know, this is really important to him or her. And you know, feedback is genuinely important. But there may be other interviewers who would think, I don't know, I don't have time for this. I feel funny answering you directly. It's awkward. It's a great question. It's just hard to answer.
Yeah. You get the whole gambit. I mean, genetic counselors are people. So most genetic counselors are great people. Not all of them, right? And the ones
Sad
that are
but
not,
true.
the ones that are not sometimes get to these really high positions where you know, they're interviewing students, or they could just be, sometimes you'll get a genetic counselor who is at the point where they're like super burned out and like really grumpy, and they're just like, I'm here, but I don't want to be here. And if that's the situation you find yourself in, like it's not you, right? It's them. So, and that's why schools have like multiple people interviewing you. And so it's not realistic to expect yourself to vibe with every person that interviews you at a school. So my kind of recommendation for like, how do you know if like an interview day as a whole went well? Did you find like a good vibe with at least one person? Because I know for me personally, I felt like the school that I eventually ended up going to, I felt like the interview day went like well overall, but for the most part, most of my interviews are like, I don't know. I have no idea how this is going. Like, it's not a train wreck, but I can't really say it's good. It's just, I'm not totally sure. And then I met with one person and we like totally connected. And I really feel that she advocated for me in the meetings after when they were deciding. And so that's kind of what you're looking for, to make a solid connection with at least one person as kind of your benchmark for how to assess that. We have another question here, mostly for Janice. What are interviewers looking for when they provide us ethically complex scenarios and ask something along the lines of, how would you counsel this patient? And she says, or they say, I often feel underqualified trying to answer this type of question. It makes me nervous. That's fair.
That is fair.
That's fair.
And as somebody who was a practicing genetic counselor for nearly 30 years, I would find that an intimidating question. So you're not alone. I think the best thing you can do is to be humble and honest, right? And what I think I would do in this situation is, but it's hard to know because the nuances of every situation are going to be different. And just think about the question. Don't belabor it. You know, they're not looking for a 5-minute dissertation on the situation. They're looking for critical thinking skills, analytical skills, empathy, any experiences that you've had that might be similar to it. And there's nothing wrong with saying, gee, I don't know. I've never been in a situation like that before. But I do remember a time when I did something, and that something hopefully will be a little bit different, but maybe along the same lines. And then you can finish it up with, I hope that answers your question appropriately. I tried to find something that would fit with what you were asking. And I think that effort really means a lot. You know, we're looking, Michaela said, genetic counselors are people. Applicants are too. Students are too. You know, we know this. And we're not looking for you to be superhuman. We're looking for honest, authentic. What do you bring to our program? So if you're willing to say, gee, I don't know, but I really want to learn that, that's a pretty good answer to me.
I feel like I remember having several schools that pitch these like ethical questions, or like sometimes they put you in a group and be like, well, you have this scenario and like, what would you do? And it was kind of like discuss type thing. And the best ways I found to really approach that is, in these ethical situations, you're really trying to think of like how to figure out what the patient feels is best for themselves, right? Because that's our job. Our job is to support the patient autonomy. So if you're gonna like walk through the ethical dilemmas of these questions in real time, and even if you're like thinking through it and talking out loud so they can hear your thinking process, which is what they're after in a lot of those situations, right? Are you brave enough to think out loud? Because that is a lot of grad school. A lot of those conclusions should be coming from the point of like, how do I help the either the patient figure out or like me to figure out what the patient truly wants and what is they think is in their best interest, right? How do I support their autonomy? And if that is kind of the framework in which you're approaching these ethical situations, then you're at least approaching it in the right way. Even if you come up with like a final answer, not that you have to, but if you come up with a final answer that is different than what the counselor would do, if your goal is to support that patient's autonomy, that's the right goal.
Yeah, and I would add, as obvious and ridiculous as this sounds, make sure the example you use actually is an ethical quandary. We've had people answer the question where we're like, yeah, that's a good story, but that has nothing to do with ethics and just really didn't answer the question. So when there are going to be questions that you can't anticipate, and you might not be able to come up with an example, but for something like that, hopefully you have something at least partially prepared that you can draw from.
I'm the one that asked that question, Janice. Thank you for responding. And you kind of read my mind, because I was like, I don't know that I've been in any situation that's that ethically complex where I could relate back to it. Yeah. So you kind of read my mind there, but.
Oh, that's funny. It's challenging for sure. And I was doing one of these small group interview prep sessions last year. And I asked, I forget exactly what the question was, but something like, have you been in an ethically tricky situation? Can you describe it to us? And this one applicant had a beautiful answer to a different question. Like I said, I love everything you just said, but it didn't answer my question. So it's hard. And, even if you don't have one within your own life, you could say, I was anticipating this question and thinking about it. I don't really know that I have something in my own life, but here's an example. I saw it on TV. I saw it in my advocacy work. I heard about it from right. I heard about it from somebody else, and I thought about that a lot afterward to think, how would I handle this situation, and go from there.
Yeah. Or tying it back to genetic counseling, like you were saying, right?
Always.
Like, I could only imagine that this would come up in a genetic counseling session when XYZ things happen, and you would have to be in that position where you would have to explain yada yada.
Right. And here's how I think I would handle it. I'd like to think I would handle it this way. It's tricky. Don't be afraid to say, gee, I really don't know. Let me think about that for a minute.
Yep. Yeah, another huge thing I just wanted to bring that point back up too is just it is okay to just stop, think about the question, and ask clarifying questions to fully understand what they're asking. If you need an example, can you please give an example of what you're sharing, or could you ask in a different way? That's okay to do that, and it's important to do that, so you are using your time wisely and answering what they want. Because
and it also shows them that if you're talking with a patient and you're not quite understanding, that you're willing to say to the patient, the managing doctor, the oncologist you work with, whoever it is, to say, let's try that again, because I'm not sure I'm understanding, and I want to make sure I answer your question the way or I want to address the question with what you're looking for, something like that. That will get you a lot further than a answer that you repeated 100 times.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate
the
feedback.
Great question. Yeah. Anyone else with a question? Any questions for setting up my interview environment at home?
That is a good question.
That's a good question. I mean, the basics: tidy background, make sure you're not going to be interrupted. If you need to aggressively kick everybody out of your house for that day, do it, right? Just make sure you're not interrupted. And just make sure you're comfortable.
In our first cohort, not an applicant, a student, who I love to pieces. She was a fantastic student, but I always wanted to say to her, oh God, with the unmade bed. She was always sitting in front, on the floor in front of her bed, and everything was just all thrown around behind her. And it was comical after a while. But, don't do that. They don't need to know that you don't.
Yeah.
I'd also recommend being in an environment that like you feel comfortable in, but like also gives you energy, because these are really long days too.
Yes.
And if you're in like a dark environment and you're just like online and getting Zoom fatigue all the time, like that comes across. So if you don't have that type of environment that can also provide that type of energy, like identify a place where when you have a 15-minute break that you can get out and get some sunshine in and get some sort of energy back into you, because these days tend to drag on sometimes, and it's back to back, and Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So
it is. And just think about what you're wearing also. Like if you're going to be hot or itchy or, you know, uncomfortable in some way, that's the wrong outfit to wear. I keep a fan next to me in my office that nobody can see, but I tend to go hot and cold. So I like to be able to put my fan on where I can do it by feel. I don't even have to be looking over generally, and it cools me off and I feel better. That's just me. You know, you might want to have an open window behind you. And you know, this is pot calling the kettle black here because I know my background's a little dark, but I think a brighter light is nicer. And probably you'll be interviewing during the day, so if you have a window behind you like I do, you know, right now it's dark, but I think brighter light is kind of nice, so figure that out too.
I always keep a lamp in front of my computer, like in front of me. There's overhead light, but I mean, check it out without the light. Like,
yeah,
not as good, right? So this looks more engaged and more present. So that's a good idea for interviews. Water, like Jess said in the chat. Yeah. Blurred backgrounds. I don't have a problem with blurred backgrounds, but like Janice, what are your thoughts? I mean, I wouldn't do the Zoom background where you're in space. Like, I don't think you need to be in space. Don't turn yourself into a cat, right? But blurred backgrounds, sure.
Yeah, I think whatever you're comfy with, you know, if you think your background is distracting or you just can't neaten it up for whatever reason, then sure, blur it. Nothing wrong with that.
Oh, Jess in the chat brought up this like idea of post-it notes with encouragement, like along your like computer frame where only you can see. Yes. On the topic of post-it notes, or just like notes in general for yourself for interview, I think that's fine. But if you're going to take notes and you want to have notes to like refer to during your interview, I think that's okay, as long as you're not like reading from them. So you're not going to write out like a whole paragraph of this is how I would answer this question. That's a no. But if you're like, okay, let me give myself a prompt for this experience. So let's say I saw a prenatal case with Fragile X syndrome. So then my sticky note maybe would be like Fragile X syndrome case. And then maybe I have like 2 or 3 bullet points that remind me of my talking points of the insight that I have about that case. And that is helpful to have. Those are the kind of notes that you can refer to just to like prompt you to discuss them, but you should be very familiar with these experiences already. So it's just that one little short bullet point to prompt you should be enough to send you down this path of, oh yes, I remember thinking about this. We discussed this in my preparation. And here's, you know, my thoughts about this experience.
Yeah, and I've had lots of applicants say to me, I hope you don't mind, I have a notepad here. I just want to be able to jot a few things down. And sometimes somebody will say, and you know, I have my questions written. That's why I'm looking down. Nothing wrong with that. I say to people all the time, please don't think I'm not looking at you. I have another screen over here. This is what I'm looking at. Nothing wrong with that at all. But make them aware of it so that they're going to figure out what you're doing. But I think it's nice that you make them aware that you're aware. Like, you know, that this might be a little bit awkward, so you're kind of preempting that.
Other questions? Kind of approaching, I know we're like well over time, so if there's other questions, we're happy to answer them. If not, we'll be done for the day. No? Okay. So again, I'm always available by email, support@gcprepllc.com. Feel free to email me about any of this. If you want to talk about potential coaching, book one of those orientation sessions. We are here and we want to help you. It is in our best interest to help you match, right? Like that's why we're here. So our job is to help bring your best traits to the surface, right? That's what our job is, okay? So we hope to see you later in some of our coaching sessions and interviews, and take care. You guys have a good night. Bye.